Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about strategies for getting press coverage of scientific papers. I'm specifically going to focus on optimizing the publication date and utilizing news hooks. So first step is timing. The most important way to make your paper newsworthy is to make sure that it's new. Once a paper is published online, its news value starts to decrease hour by hour. So the way to get around this is by sharing your paper with reporters under embargo 4 to 7 days before publication. So you want to let the journal know that you want to do this as soon as possible, since many journals will post papers online immediately. And to reporters, once a paper is online, it's published. It doesn't matter if the print version hasn't come out yet. So be sure to look at the journal's author guidelines, which should tell you their policy for setting publication dates. So for example, here is ES&P's author guidelines, and it shows you who to contact if you want to do a press release and an embargo. And when you're setting a publication date with the journal, they'll often let you pick the day and time of online publication. The best days are the middle of the week, and the best time is early in the morning. If your paper has international news value, it's good to do something like 12:01 a.m. Eastern time. And you'll also want to take into consideration your availability and your co-author's availability to correspond with reporters by phone, or increasingly these days by email, on the day of publication and in the embargo period leading up to publication. And you want to avoid days you know will be heavy news days, like election days. Although most big news days aren't foreseeable far in advance, and even if you're incredibly prepared, your paper might get eclipsed by something, and it will probably happen to you at least once, sadly. However, if there's an event that relates to your paper, you might choose to publish on the same day and leverage that connection in your press release. So for example, your paper might be relevant to a bill that will be introduced in Congress, or you studied a chemical in candy wrappers and Halloween is coming up. So now you have a perfect publication date where all the stars align in your favor, but now you have to write a press release. So your press release should use 1 or 2 angles that appeal to the news values that are taught in journalism school. We call these hooks. And there are 6 types of hooks that I have found to work well for environmental health science. The first is broad impact. Does what you found affect the health and well-being of a large segment of the population? This is a built-in easy angle if you're doing epidemiology studies, but a lot of us are doing work that's indirectly about health effects, like measuring the amount of chemicals in dust or products. So in that case, we'd want to connect those dots clearly in the press release, ideally right in the headline. So an example of this is a paper the Institute did on PFAS in food packaging. So the title of the paper is just exactly what was studied: fluorinated compounds in US fast food packaging. But the press release headline focuses on the implication that a large segment of the population, people who eat fast food, are potentially consuming toxic chemicals. And this paper got a ton of press coverage, even in CNN, as you see here. The next news hook is currency. So in journalism, that term means how a story pertains to issues that are already in the spotlight and are a subject of ongoing news coverage. So does your paper plug into what a reporter is already writing about? Any story right now that relates to the coronavirus would have a lot of currency. So here's a paper that Miriam Diamond's team put out in June, and they reached out to us to help with the press release. So the paper is about concentrations of flame retardants on hands, electronics, and in house dust. No direct connection to the coronavirus. The word coronavirus appears nowhere in the paper, but the connection I saw was hand washing. So there was tons of coronavirus articles being written about proper hand washing techniques and songs to sing for 20 seconds. And here's this paper giving us another reason to wash hands. So that's what we went with. And indeed, that worked really well. And we generated a lot of coverage, and pretty much all of the reporters went with that hand washing angle. Another hook that comes up a lot in environmental health is injustice. So as with health, sometimes you're directly studying a disparity and it's obvious that it's an environmental justice issue, but you might also be indirectly studying a disparity you can connect those dots in a press release. An example of that is this study that found children drinking private well water have higher blood lead levels than those with city water. So to people who aren't experts on drinking water systems, it's not obvious that this is an environmental injustice. So in their press release, they have a quote explaining how discriminatory zoning practices have excluded low-income and Black neighborhoods from municipal water service. And then the Guardian's environmental justice reporter did this excellent piece and used that quote. An angle that comes up a lot in environmental health is irony. So these are unexpected stories. When a dog bites a man, it's not news, but when a man bites a dog, it is. So if your study found a toxic chemical in a product that's advertised as healthy or green, this is your news hook. So last month, we had a paper about a flame retardant in certain types of insulation. And it turns out this is the type of insulation that's used in green buildings. So that was our angle for the press release. And indeed, that was newsworthy. And regrettable substitute studies also appeal to this irony angle. So here's a paper on organophosphate flame retardants where we use that hook. And the resulting news coverage was about how this supposedly healthy substitute chemicals are potentially as bad as the original. A really powerful but very tricky news hook is conflict. So this would, in environmental health, this would typically be science versus chemical industry. And this can understandably make some academic and government scientists nervous, but it can be really worthwhile if done well. One thing to consider is rebutting bad industry science on the chemical that you're studying and not letting it stand. So that's what these chlorpyrifos researchers did here. And their press release made it obvious that they're specifically critiquing industry-funded science. And this sparked an investigative science piece in BuzzFeed News that was really great. The last hook I want to talk about is the local angle. The studies related to local contamination are obvious local stories, but studies can also have local angles when several of the authors are from the same area, or if you do health studies on a certain chemical, you can connect with community groups in an area where that chemical is a problem, and they can be spokespeople in their local media. Or here's an example from EWG, where they got participants from all over the country in their study of flame retardants in breast milk to be available to talk to their local media outlets. And this resulted in coverage of this national study of flame retardants in breast milk in outlets like the Montana Standard. And the Montana Standard wouldn't normally cover this kind of story if it's just seen as a national story, but these participants from Montana gave an interview with the local reporter. And coverage in these local and regional outlets can be just as impactful and sometimes even more so than big national outlets in New York and DC. For example, US senators and representatives usually read their hometown papers regularly to see what issues are affecting their constituents. And that kind of brings us back to the whole goal of getting press, which is to reach the people who can translate your research into positive change.